Okay, so you're trying to wrap your head around all the big global issues, right?
The complicated ones.
The ones that are tough to really get a handle on, but you don't want to spend like days and days poring over like super dense reports.
Right.
And that is precisely where we come in. We take those really important reports, like this one, the Director of National Intelligence's unclassified annual threat assessment.
For 2025.
Yeah, for 2025. Thank you. We take it and we pull out the most critical knowledge, the stuff that you need to know.
Yeah, think of it as like a streamlined briefing on the most important national security threats that the U.S. is facing right now.
Exactly.
This report informs policymakers, military leaders, law enforcement. It gives them a nuanced understanding of what's out there. And it's current as of March 18th, 2025.
Exactly. And we're going to break this down logically, just like the report itself.
Right.
Starting with the challenges from non-state actors, and then we'll move to the major countries.
Yep. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And then we'll wrap up by looking at how all these actors are increasingly working together.
Right. And that's one of the first things that the report highlights.
Yeah.
These threats aren't isolated. They're all interconnected, and that makes for a much more dangerous and complex security environment.
Definitely.
Yeah. So our mission for you today is simple, to give you a really clear picture of the main threats, what's really driving them, without getting bogged down in the details.
Right.
So let's dive in.
Let's start with non-state actors.
Okay.
The report makes clear that transnational criminal organizations,
TCOs,
and terrorist groups pose a direct and significant threat to U.S. citizens, both here at home and abroad, and also to our national interests.
Right.
And this really does impact American lives and livelihoods in very real ways.
And they kick off by really focusing on the foreign illicit drug trade and specifically the ongoing lethal impact of fentanyl.
Yeah, and other synthetic opioids.
I mean, the numbers are still staggering. Over 52,000 U.S. deaths in the year leading up to October 2024.
Yeah, that's a heavy toll.
Yeah.
But the report does note that there's a nearly 33% decrease in deaths compared to the previous year.
Really?
So that could suggest that, the increased availability of naloxone, the overdose reversal drug,
right,
is having some effect. But, the overall crisis continues.
Right. And when we talk about, where these deadly drugs are coming from.
Yeah, where are they coming from?
The report points directly at Mexico-based transnational criminal organizations.
Yeah.
The Sinaloa cartel and the new generation Jalisco cartel. They remain the dominant forces in producing and supplying fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine that ends up here in the U.S.
Right. And it's interesting, how these drugs are primarily entering the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
According to the assessment, it's mainly through official U.S.-Mexico border crossings.
Really?
Often concealed in, regular passenger vehicles or, tractor trailers.
Wow. So they're adapting all the time. I mean, the report mentions that they'll likely shift their smuggling routes and methods.
Oh, yeah.
In response to, whatever we do to try to increase border security.
Of course, yeah.
It's a constant back and forth.
Yeah, it is. The report also highlights a concerning trend. A growing number of independent fentanyl producers operating in Mexico.
Really?
Outside the direct control of those major cartels that we talked about.
So what's driving that increase in independent production?
Well, it seems like it's the high profitability of fentanyl and the relatively low barriers to entry.
Right.
It doesn't require a lot of infrastructure, just some basic lab equipment and some chemical knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And this decentralization makes it even harder to disrupt the supply chain.
Right.
Yeah.
And they talk about cocaine too. The report notes that Colombia-based TCOs remain the primary source reaching the U.S.
Uh-huh.
Apparently, Ecuador is becoming a more significant transshipment point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's contributing to rising violence and migration in that country. I mean, it really shows you how these criminal activities can destabilize entire regions.
Absolutely, yeah.
And staying in Mexico, the report details this really alarming increase in the use of improvised explosive devices. IEDs by these TCOs against rival groups.
Oh, wow.
And even Mexican security forces.
That's the government.
Yeah, we're talking about landmines, mortars, grenades. I mean, this is a dangerous evolution. It's blurring the lines between criminal activity and like an insurgency.
That's a huge escalation.
It is. And the numbers are shocking. Nearly 1,600 attacks in 2024.
Wow.
Huge jump from just 3 in the preceding couple years.
Yeah, that shows a real increase in their sophistication and ruthlessness.
It does.
Yeah, it indicates that they've got some training, access to materials. Mm-hmm. This is a serious threat, not just within Mexico, but potentially for any security operations, along the border.
Along the border.
Right.
And we can't talk about fentanyl without talking about the source of the precursor chemicals.
The stuff they use to make it.
Yeah, and the pill pressing equipment.
Right.
And the report identifies China as the primary source country, followed by India.
Okay.
And what's interesting is how these Mexico-based chemical brokers are evading, international controls.
How are they doing that?
Well, they're using tactics like mislabeling shipments and procuring chemicals that are not regulated but that can be used to make fentanyl.
Oh, wow.
And this highlights the difficulties in tracking and disrupting these global illicit supply chains.
Makes sense.
It does. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another key non-state threat, transnational Islamic extremists.
Okay.
The report states that ISIS's most aggressive global branches,
like ISIS,
including ISIS-K, and individual sympathizers remain intent on attacking the West,
right,
including the U.S. using online platforms and exploiting vulnerable travel routes.
That's scary. It is.
Yeah. And what's also concerning is they can still, inspire or direct attacks.
Yeah.
Even though they've lost territory and, leaders.
Right.
It's like they leverage that online propaganda to reach potential recruits. And they also find, weaknesses in security to exploit.
Even though ISIS has lost a lot of ground and a lot of leaders in recent years,
yeah,
the report emphasizes that it's still the largest global Islamic terrorist organization.
Oh, wow.
And they are actively trying to regain momentum.
Yeah, of course.
They rely on their geographically dispersed branches and surviving leadership to keep their ideology, and operations alive.
So they're not done.
They are not a spent force by any means.
No.
The report provides a couple of disturbing examples here in the U.S.
Oh, really?
The New Year's Day attacker in New Orleans was reportedly inspired by ISIS online material.
Oh, wow.
And an individual was arrested for allegedly planning an election day attack in the name of ISIS.
So these incidents illustrate their continued reach and influence within our borders.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and ISIS-K, based in South Asia, is specifically identified as the branch with the most capability and stated intent to conduct attacks outside of their immediate region.
So they want to strike globally.
That's their aspiration.
Wow. The attacks that they've claimed or been linked to in Russia and Iran in 2024.
Right.
Plus all the arrests of people with ties to ISIS-K in Europe and the U.S. That really shows their global reach and ambition.
And the report also mentions ISIS's ambition to exploit, a potential collapse of the Assad regime in Syria.
Interesting. So what's the concern there?
Well, the worry is that the power vacuum created by Assad's fall could provide ISIS with this opportunity to, reconstitute its forces, release imprisoned fighters.
Regain territory,
and potentially, be able to plan and launch more external attacks.
Against the West.
And it sounds like Africa is becoming a much more important area for ISIS.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The report notes significant growth in ISIS Somalia, with ISIS West Africa remaining their largest branch, and ISIS Sahel expanding its reach into coastal West Africa. That's a worrying geographic spread.
Yeah, it shows they're diversifying their theaters of operation.
Right.
Which makes counterterrorism efforts much more difficult.
Much more difficult, yes. Moving on to Al-Qaeda, the report states that they maintain their intent to target the U.S. and U.S. citizens through their various global affiliates.
Okay.
And they've also been really actively trying to capitalize on, the heightened anti-Israeli sentiment.
Surrounding the conflict in Gaza.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, their media outlets have been very vocal in supporting Hamas and encouraging attacks against Israeli and U.S. targets.
Both. Yeah. And AQFP Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has even relaunched its Inspire Guide.
That's bad.
It is. It provides instructions for bomb making and encourages attacks against Jewish targets, the U.S. and Europe, even including justifications for targeting civilian airliners.
That's a detailed and persistent threat.
Chillingly detailed and persistent.
Yeah, it really shows their enduring desire to inspire attacks.
Right.
Regionally and globally, and they're still trying to spread the means and, the justification for doing so.
And Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's largest and wealthiest affiliate, is primarily focused on Somalia, but they're also providing funding to Al-Qaeda Central.
Oh, really?
and developing a relationship with the Houthis.
Interesting.
And that connection could give them access to more sophisticated weaponry, increasing the threat to U.S. interests in that region.
Yeah, that could be a dangerous escalation.
It could.
Yeah, the possibility of al-Shabaab getting, more advanced weapons through that relationship could really enhance their capabilities and, become a threat to regional stability and U.S. interest.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And in West Africa, al-Qaeda appears to be expanding its territorial influence by providing local services and using intimidation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also moving closer to urban centers where U.S. personnel are located.
So more direct risk.
Yeah, a direct and growing risk.
Yeah, if they have an expanding presence in those areas, they'd have greater operational space, for planning attacks.
Yeah.
And it would also pose a more direct threat to personnel on the ground.
Right. The report also touches on Haraz al-Din. That's al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria.
Okay.
And despite a public announcement that they were dissolving, the report suggests they're likely trying to strengthen their position.
In anticipation of Assad falling.
In anticipation of a potential weakening or fall of the Assad regime.
Okay.
And their focus remains on fighting against Israel and its allies.
So public statements don't always reflect reality.
Don't always reflect reality.
No.
With these groups.
No, they often adapt their, public image and organizational structures.
Right.
For strategic purposes.
Yeah.
And beyond ISIS and Al-Qaeda, there are other Islamic terrorist groups to be aware of.
Lebanese Hezbollah, for instance, has primarily focused its attacks on Israeli and Jewish individuals.
Okay.
But the U.S. government is monitoring whether they might broaden their target set.
To include more transnational attacks?
To include transnational attacks against U.S. interests.
So while they've been focused regionally, their history and their capabilities mean we need to be vigilant.
We do.
About them potentially targeting U.S. interests more broadly.
And in South Asia, Tehrik-e-Taliban, or TTP, has been primarily focused on attacking the Pakistani government.
Right.
But their historical ties to al-Qaeda and past support for anti-U.S. operations remain a concern.
Yeah.
The same holds true for anti-India groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, given their established links to al-Qaeda.
Right.
So these long-standing relationships could be reactivated.
If strategic needs change.
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. These enduring connections and shared ideologies mean that even groups that are, mainly engaged in regional conflicts, they could potentially get involved in or, support attacks targeting the U.S. or our allies.
Right. Okay. So let's shift our focus now to other types of transnational criminals.
Okay.
Those driven primarily by financial gain.
Okay.
And the report indicates that these organizations are increasingly using corruption, intimidation, and, advanced technology to expand their operations, diversify their revenue streams.
And become more resilient to law enforcement.
Make them more resilient to the law enforcement efforts.
Exactly.
And what's concerning is how sophisticated and adaptable they've become.
Yeah.
By engaging in this wider range of, illicit activities and leveraging technology, they're less vulnerable to being disrupted.
Right.
If law enforcement focuses on just one area, they've got all these others.
And they're not just involved in the drug trade.
No.
The report highlights their activities in defrauding U.S. citizens' businesses and government programs.
Oh, wow.
As well as laundering billions of dollars through our financial system.
Often they outsource these complex financial operations to experts.
Really?
Which indicates a high degree of organization and sophistication.
It does. Yeah. So they're using people with, expertise in law, finance, and technology.
Right.
To help them, exploit vulnerabilities.
And financial regulations and systems.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when it comes to laundering illicit funds and evading sanctions.
Yeah. How are they doing that?
Digital currencies are playing an increasingly significant role.
Really?
Due to the perceived anonymity and less stringent regulations.
Oh, I see.
Compared to traditional financial systems.
Right.
So this adds a whole new layer of complexity for, those trying to track and intercept these illegal financial flows.
Yeah, it does. While they're not entirely untraceable, the decentralized nature of digital currencies, and the varying regulatory environments, offer a lot of opportunities for TCOs to move and conceal their profits.
Right. And financially motivated cyber criminals also pose a major threat.
Right.
They target inadequately defended U.S. entities.
Like who?
Like healthcare providers, local governments.
Okay.
Which can have widespread and damaging consequences.
For ordinary Americans.
Yeah. And they are also increasingly targeting critical infrastructure sectors
Oh, wow.
The report provides an example, a ransomware attack in mid-2024 on the largest payment processor for U.S. healthcare transactions.
Wow.
And this disrupted prescription refills delayed access to vital medical records, even forced ambulances to divert patients. So it illustrates the real-world impact.
Yeah, the real consequences.
The real consequences of these cyber attacks.
For sure.
And it sounds like our water infrastructure is becoming a more frequent target.
Really?
The report mentions cyber attacks in October 2024 against both large and small water utilities.
Yeah.
And this is concerning given that these are, essential services.
Right.
And these attacks may have even been inspired by, earlier, less successful attempts.
By state-sponsored actors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is worrying. Even if the initial impact was limited, the fact that they're going after critical infrastructure,
Right.
shows a growing intent and capability to disrupt essential services.
Yes, it does. And human trafficking is another horrific crime that's detailed in the report. Yeah. Foreign and U.S.-based traffickers exploit vulnerable individuals with false promises. They confiscate their documents, force them into dangerous and inhumane conditions.
Right.
And this often intersects with other criminal activities.
Like what?
Fraud, drug trafficking, weapons smuggling.
Oh, wow.
It highlights the interconnected nature of these illicit networks.
So these trafficking networks are a key part of broader criminal enterprises.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The report provides a disturbing example of Mexico-based TCOs exploiting migrants through kidnapping for ransom, forced labor, and sex trafficking.
Oh, wow.
And this includes, trapping them in debt bondage after arrival in the U.S.
To pay off smuggling fees.
To pay off smuggling fees, exactly. Forcing them into exploitative situations.
Like
domestic service, fishing, agriculture, meat processing, illegal marijuana, grow houses. It's a truly appalling human cost.
It is. Yeah, it's a reminder of the human suffering, that fuels these criminal enterprises.
Sadly, yes. Now, interestingly, the report notes a pretty significant decrease in the number of migrants attempting to reach the U.S. since January 2025.
Oh, wow.
And they attribute that to increased border security measures.
Okay.
But they also point out that the underlying factors, driving migration.
Things like crime and poverty.
Crime, poverty, political repression.
Right.
Likely persist.
Yeah. So while the numbers are down, the potential for future surges is still there.
Exactly.
That's a good point. While, enhanced border security can be a deterrent, it doesn't address those root causes,
right,
that are compelling people to leave their homes in the first place.
Right.
So we can still see shifts depending on geopolitics or, socioeconomic factors.
Exactly. And the report includes some data on border encounters. They note a 14% decrease in 2024 compared to the previous year, and a dramatic 85% drop in U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border in January 2025 compared to the same period in 2024.
Wow.
And nationals from Guatemala, Mexico, and Venezuela were the most frequently encountered.
Okay.
So these statistics offer like a snapshot of the situation at the border at a particular time. But as the report underscores, these patterns can change.
Quickly.
They can change quickly, in response to various factors.
Right.
And they provide a good example.
Oh, yeah.
Nicaragua's removal of visa requirements for air travelers back in 2021 led to a significant increase in U.S.-bound migration through that country.
Oh, wow.
So it just illustrates how policy changes in one nation can have these unforeseen and substantial ripple effects on migration flows elsewhere.
It shows how complex migration patterns are.
They are.
They're influenced by so many things.
They are.
Both U.S. policies and policies of, transit countries in the region.
Right. Okay, so let's move on now to the major state actors.
The big players.
The big players.
Yeah.
Yeah, the report identifies several of these nations as posing both, immediate and long-term threats.
Right.
And they significantly challenge U.S. military and economic power.
On a global scale.
On a global scale.
Right.
Yeah, and while all four, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea present significant concerns.
Right.
The report emphasizes that China stands out as the most capable of threatening U.S. interests globally.
Interesting.
But it also notes that China tends to be more measured.
More cautious.
More cautious, in its aggression.
Compared to the others. Why is that, do you think?
Probably because of their vast economic interests and their desire for, global influence.
It makes sense.
Yeah. And what's particularly concerning is the increasing level of cooperation among these actors.
Oh.
The report highlights that this growing collaboration is is amplifying the overall threat.
Right? So a conflict with one could draw in the others.
It's like a dangerous network forming.
Exactly. Yeah, their increasing alignment really complicates the geopolitical landscape.
It does.
And it means that the U.S. needs a more integrated and nuanced approach to foreign policy and, national security strategy.
We do. Okay, so let's start with China.
Okay.
The report outlines President Xi Jinping's overarching vision of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by 2049.
Ambitious. So what are their main goals right now? What are they focused on?
Well, the report indicates that China's primary goals include significantly increasing its global power and influence, shaping international norms and events to its advantage, gaining, greater deference from the U.S. to its core interests, and safeguarding its domestic political system and international reputation.
So achieving global preeminence.
Yeah, okay. And it sounds like Beijing views the U.S. with a deep level of suspicion. They perceive Washington's actions as a deliberate strategy to contain China's rise, undermine the Communist Party's authority, and prevent them from achieving their long-term objectives.
Wow.
This fundamental mistrust is a major factor shaping their actions.
Yeah, if they see us as trying to contain them,
right,
they're going to look for ways to, push back.
They are. And the report notes that Chinese leaders are particularly concerned about any unified and strong opposition from the U.S. and its allies to their strategic ambitions.
So that's a big part of why they're, strengthening their relationships with countries like Russia and North Korea.
Right.
To build that counterweight to U.S. influence.
To build a counterweight, exactly. Yeah. At the same time, the report suggests that China will seek opportunities to de-escalate tensions with the U.S.
When it's beneficial to them.
When it serves Beijing's own interests, protects its, core strategic concerns, and allows them to continue their long-term growth and development.
So it's a calculated approach to the relationship.
It is.
They're going to engage in diplomacy and seek stable relations when it benefits them, but at the same time, they'll continue to, assert their interests and prepare for conflict.
Right.
Yeah, the report specifically mentions that they're still trying to pressure Taiwan towards unification, and they're continuing those cyber operations targeting the U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
And despite U.S. efforts, it seems that China will likely struggle to really curb the flow of, fentanyl precursors.
Yeah, and synthetic opioids to the U.S.
And synthetic opioids to the U.S. without, more robust law enforcement action on their part.
It's a tough issue with a lot of different actors.
It is.
It's hard for Beijing to fully control this problem.
Right.
Even if they say they want to.
Right. And the report also highlights the routine military operations that China conducts to project power.
In the Taiwan Strait.
In the Taiwan Strait, yeah, and assert its territorial claims in the South and East China Seas. And these frequent confrontations increase the risk of miscalculation and potential conflict.
Yeah, that constant pressure is destabilizing.
It is.
Yeah, those activities are designed to, incrementally assert their claims and normalize their military presence. Yeah. In these contested areas.
Right.
That increases the risk of, unintended incidents.
Yeah. And in the cyber domain, China has demonstrated, a significant and persistent ability to compromise U.S. infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
And the report indicates that they could leverage these capabilities, during a period of heightened tension or conflict.
That's a scary thought. Like, our essential services could be disrupted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Campaigns like Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon are examples of how sophisticated they've become at getting access to and potentially disrupting those critical infrastructure systems.
Right. So turning to China's military, the report is quite direct.
Okay.
They characterize it as the most comprehensive and robust military threat to U.S. national security. And they are developing a joint force capable of conducting full-spectrum warfare.
To challenge U.S. intervention.
To challenge U.S. intervention in the Indo-Pacific and to project power globally.
It sounds like they're aiming for military parity.
Yeah.
If not superiority.
It's not superiority.
In key areas.
That's the trajectory.
Yeah, and a major focus is, developing what the report calls counter-intervention capabilities, designed to deter and counter, all aspects of U.S. and allied military operations in the Pacific.
Right.
Yeah, and they have these modernization milestones set for 2027, 2035, ultimately aiming for a world-class military by 2049. This is a long-term plan.
It is.
Ambitious, well-resourced.
It is. The report provides specific examples of their advancements in 2024.
Likewise.
The PLA Navy's third aircraft carrier, the Fujin, which is likely to become operational in 2025.
Yeah, that enhances their naval power projection capabilities.
Significant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Adding a third carrier, especially one as advanced as the Fujian,
Right.
really boosts their ability to project air power.
Right.
Far beyond their coastline.
And they're also reportedly fielding a new ballistic missile, the DF-27, which may include a hypersonic glide vehicle.
Wow.
And has a range that could potentially reach, critical U.S. territories.
Like where?
In the Western Pacific, including Guam, Hawaii, and Alaska.
Yeah, hypersonic technology is a problem for missile defense systems.
It is.
It's hard to track and intercept.
It is.
With current technologies.
The speed and the maneuverability make them really difficult to deal with. And even their ground forces are undergoing modernization.
Oh, really?
Advanced multiple rocket launchers like the PCH-191, which enhance their long-range precision strike capabilities.
So every branch of the PLA is getting upgrades.
It seems that way.
Yeah, the report really emphasizes that the PLA has made improvements.
Yeah.
In its force structure, its readiness and training.
Across all services.
Across all services.
Yeah.
With notable progress in modernizing ground forces.
Yeah.
Expanding the Navy with, those advanced warships we talked about.
Right.
Fielding new missile systems, bolstering their, electronic warfare capabilities.
Right.
Yeah.
The report also points out that the PLA already possesses the capability to conduct long-range precision strikes. With conventional weapons against, key U.S. assets in the Western Pacific.
Like what?
Guam, Hawaii, Alaska.
Right.
Utilizing a variety of platforms. And there's even mention of potential development of conventionally armed intercontinental range missiles.
So that could threaten the continental U.S.
Which could directly threaten the continental U.S.
That would be a big escalation.
It would.
In their strike capability.
It would. And while their current ICBMs are believed to be nuclear armed.
Right.
Developing a conventionally armed version would provide them with, a non-nuclear option for striking targets within the continental United States, which significantly alters strategic calculations.
For sure.
And to project this growing power.
Yeah.
The PLA is actively pursuing overseas military installations and access agreements.
Oh, really?
They're exploring various logistical models.
Right.
From establishing dedicated PLA facilities to securing preferential access to existing commercial infrastructure.
Oh, I see.
In key regions.
So they're trying to build a global support network.
Exactly.
So they can sustain military operations far from China.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it sounds like China is employing a comprehensive whole-of-government approach. Utilizing military, economic, and influence operations.
Short of war.
Short of outright war.
To advance their goals.